He's only with you because I was married first. He settled for you. Those words hit me like a cold slap. Jessa Wynn, my husband Kaylin's girl best friend, leaned in at a simple backyard cookout and dropped that line like she was telling me the weather. She didn't blink. She didn't soften it. She wanted it to land, and it did. For a moment, everything around me went quiet. People laughed near the grill, kids ran across the yard, music played somewhere behind us, but all I could hear was the echo of her voice repeating that one cruel sentence. I stood there holding a plate of food I no longer wanted, feeling the ground shift under my feet. I had trusted Kaylin. I had trusted Jessa. I believed they were simply close friends with a long history. I never questioned it. Maybe I didn't want to. But that whisper cracked something open inside me that I could not close again. I didn't react right then. I didn't show her the pain she clearly wanted to see. I just nodded and walked away, my heart pounding, my thoughts racing. If she said this with such confidence, what had Kaylin told her? What had they shared behind my back? And why was she so sure I was second choice? That moment became the start of everything that followed, the questions, the signs I had ignored, the truth I never imagined I would uncover. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Mira Lane, and in the early days of my marriage to Kaylin Ross, life felt steady and warm. We had a small place with creaky floors and sunlight that poured into the kitchen every morning. Kaylin would wrap his arms around me while I made coffee, telling me he was glad he found someone who understood him. I believed every word because nothing in those moments gave me a reason to doubt him. Kaylin carried himself with a quiet confidence that made me feel safe. He worked hard, came home tired but smiling, and always asked about my day first. I felt chosen, wanted, and sure of the future we were building. Our routines were simple: weeknight dinners, long drives on weekends, whispered plans about someday owning a house with a small yard. I held on to those early memories because they felt pure. Jessa Wynn had been in Kaylin's life long before I arrived. He introduced her as someone he grew up with, someone who understood his childhood in ways no one else did. She greeted me with a bright smile and called me Kaylin's perfect match. I believed her warmth was genuine. She dropped by with baked goods, invited us to little gatherings, and talked about old memories that made them both laugh. Nothing seemed out of place. I accepted her place in his world because Kaylin never gave me a reason to question it. He always said she was like family, and I wanted to be supportive. I thought letting people in was part of building a marriage. In those early days, everything felt calm. I didn't see any shadows. I didn't feel any tension. I thought I had stepped into a life where trust would carry us forward without cracks waiting to spread. The first hints that something was off came quietly. Jessa began showing up without calling, walking into our home like it was her own. I'd hear the door open, and before I could react, she'd be in the living room chatting with Kaylin as if they had planned it. He acted like it was normal, but I felt a small shift every time. Then there were the jokes. They had little phrases from their past that only they understood, and at first, I didn't mind. But the way she leaned in, whispering something that made him laugh while I sat there feeling invisible, started to bother me. It wasn't the laughter, it was the way she looked at me afterward, like I was on the outside of a circle she didn't plan to let me into. She began touching him lightly on the arm or shoulder, always with some excuse, old habits, just teasing, you know how I am. Kaylin brushed it off, but the casual contact felt too familiar, too easy, too natural for someone who supposedly saw him as a brother. Conversations became another battleground. When I tried to join in, she'd talk over me or redirect everything back to some story she shared with him. It was subtle, but each instance made me feel smaller. Sometimes she'd answer questions directed at me, as if she had the right to speak in my place. Kaylin didn't notice the tension. Or maybe he didn't want to. He insisted she was harmless, that I was reading too much into things. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was testing limits, seeing how far she could go before I pushed back. Those early signs were gentle but steady, like a drip that eventually becomes a leak. I didn't know then how deep the damage would run. I tried to bring my feelings to Kalen gently at first. I told him I felt pushed aside when Jessa acted like our home belonged to her, or when she behaved as if she had some special claim over him. I expected he would at least listen, maybe reassure me, maybe set a few boundaries. Instead, something in him tightened the moment her name came up. He didn't pause to think. He didn't ask why I felt uneasy. He snapped. According to him, I was imagining problems, stirring conflict, creating tension where none existed. He said I was reading too much into things, then moved straight into defending her with a force that stunned me. It wasn't calm explanation or understanding, it was sharp, immediate resistance, like he needed to protect her from me. He insisted she meant nothing harmful, that she had always been in his life, that questioning her closeness was unfair. Every attempt I made to explain how her actions affected me only made him pull back further. He refused to hear the part about her touching him, or dismissing me, or the way she acted like I was temporary. He brushed all of it aside as if I was the problem. I could feel something in our marriage shift. A small tear forming, the kind that doesn't look like much at first but deepens with every strained conversation. I wanted to believe it was stress or misunderstanding. I told myself that if I stayed patient, he would eventually see how his reactions hurt me. But the more I tried to talk, the more distant he became. It felt like he was guarding a door I wasn't allowed to open, and behind it stood the one person he refused to question. I tried to swallow the ache and move forward, pretending that tiny crack wasn't spreading. The shift in Jess's tone came slowly, like she was testing how much she could get away with. Her comments slid into conversations with a sweetness that felt forced, almost practiced. She'd smile as if she were being friendly, but every word carried a sting meant only for me. One afternoon, while we were helping Kalen sort through boxes in the garage, she looked me over and said with a laugh, "Kalen always needed someone steady. You're definitely the safe choice." She said it lightly, but the way her eyes lingered on me told a different story, one of judgment, not humor. Another time, she mentioned how Kalen used to be drawn to wild energy, then glanced at me and added, "But I guess simple works for him now." She didn't say my name, but she didn't need to. She wanted me to hear the message beneath her words. I wasn't enough in the ways she believed mattered. The remarks kept coming, each one sharper, each one designed to sound harmless if repeated, yet deeply cutting in the moment. She'd bring up things from Kalen's past, old adventures, risks he had taken, people he once dated, then contrast them with the person he was with me. Her tone always carried a quiet he settled, without saying it outright. Kalen never caught these exchanges. She waited until he stepped out or turned away before letting the barbs slip. And each time, she watched my reaction with an almost curious expression, like she was studying how far she could push before I broke. I didn't rise to her bait. I stayed calm, even though her words sank deep. I knew she wanted a reaction she could twist. But inside, something colder began forming, a silent awareness that things were not innocent, and she wasn't just being careless. She was provoking me on purpose. The day of the cookout felt innocent at first. The sun was bright, kids were running around the yard, and the smell of grilled food hung in the air. People chatted in small groups, and the atmosphere was loud enough that no one paid attention to quiet moments at the edges. That's where Jessa found me, by the drink table, away from most of the noise. She stepped close enough that I could feel the shift in her energy before she even spoke. Her smile was small, almost polite, but her eyes carried the same challenge I had been noticing for weeks. She glanced at the crowd to make sure no one was watching, then leaned in like she was about to share a harmless secret. Instead, she gave me the line that shattered everything I thought I understood. "He's only with you because I was married first. He settled for you." She said it softly, like she wasn't trying to cause a scene, only damage. Her face didn't drop the smile. She was studying me, waiting for shock, anger, tears. Waiting for something she could use. For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. The sounds around us faded, and all I heard was the low echo of her words repeating in my mind. My grip tightened on the cup in my hand, but I didn't give her the reaction she wanted. I just looked at her, forcing my expression to stay steady while something deep inside me shifted. It wasn't just pain. It was clarity. A cold recognition that this wasn't jealousy or misunderstanding, this was intention. She held my gaze for a moment longer, smirking like she had scored a victory. But what she didn't see was the quiet snap inside me, the moment I understood that I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. The truth had finally hit, and I could no longer pretend the ground beneath my marriage was solid. After that cookout, a new awareness settled over me. I didn't confront Kaylin right away. I didn't argue or cry. I simply began paying attention in a way I hadn't before. The smallest things, once dismissed as normal, now stood out like warning lights. Kaylin started coming home later than usual, offering explanations that felt thin. He'd say a project ran long or a coworker needed help, but his tone lacked the ease it once had. When he walked through the door, he seemed distracted, almost guarded, as if carrying something he didn't want me to see. His phone, once left on the counter or plugged in near the couch, never left his pocket. When it buzzed, he turned the screen away. Sometimes he stepped into another room to take a call, lowering his voice to a level I couldn't make out. If I entered the hallway, he'd end the conversation quickly and pretend it was nothing. I noticed messages disappear. A notification would pop up, and minutes later the thread would be gone. He claimed he was clearing space, but the timing felt deliberate. I didn't confront him. Instead, I observed quietly, letting the patterns reveal themselves. I watched how he reacted when Jess's name came up, tight shoulders, quick deflection, a forced calm. I noticed how she appeared less often in person yet seemed more present in his mood, like their connection had moved somewhere private. Late at night, when he fell asleep, I replayed the days in my mind, fitting the pieces together. I wasn't hunting for something to confirm fear, I was searching because my instincts finally had room to speak. The truth wasn't glaring yet, but the threads were there, thin and tangled. And I knew if I kept paying attention, they would eventually lead me to what he never expected me to uncover. One night, after he fell asleep, I found myself alone with his laptop. I hadn't planned to search, but something compelled me to look deeper. What I discovered made my stomach twist. There it was, messages stretching back years, full of confessions and longing, things I never imagined Kaylin could share with anyone but me. Jess's words were sharp, intimate, almost like a diary she had written for him alone. She admitted regrets about her own marriage, called it a mistake, and poured her thoughts about him into every line. And Kaylin, my Kaylin, answered in kind, telling her he had waited too long, that he wished things had been different sooner. The exchanges weren't brief notes, they were daily conversations, layered with emotional closeness I had never had with him. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was woven into every word they exchanged. Plans he shared with her, jokes he reserved for her, little wishes he whispered that were meant to remain hidden. Each message was proof that he had built a private world without me, a place where I didn't exist in the way he existed in hers. I felt a mix of disbelief, anger, and heartbreak. I reread the conversations, needing to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. But the evidence was undeniable. Every hesitation, every late night, every unexplained moment now had context. The truth hit harder than I expected. The man I married, the life I thought we were building together, had been shared emotionally with someone else for years. The betrayal was complete, intricate, and deliberate. I closed the laptop slowly, feeling both devastation and a strange clarity. Now that I knew, there was no turning back. I had the proof I needed, and with it, the power to decide what would happen next. The moment I understood my place in Kaylin's heart, something inside me shifted. It wasn't sudden anger or a burst of tears, it was a quiet, determined clarity. I was not the one he truly desired. I had been the safe harbor, the convenient presence while Jessa held the space he truly craved. I packed my things slowly, deliberately. Each item I folded and placed in my bag felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I didn't argue, I didn't shout, and I didn't leave notes meant to wound him. I didn't want to give him any control over my exit or allow him the chance to manipulate the narrative. Walking out the door, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and relief. The home that once felt like a sanctuary now carried the weight of betrayal. But leaving didn't feel like running away, it felt like stepping into the life I deserved, the life I had ignored in my hope for him to choose me truly. I left with my head held high, my heart aching but not broken beyond repair. I didn't glance back. I didn't wait for him to apologize or explain. My departure was my statement. I would not stay where I was second choice. I would not accept being a placeholder in a marriage that belonged emotionally to someone else. For the first time in months, the world felt open. The uncertainty ahead was intimidating, but it was mine. I was no longer tied to his indecision or Jess's influence. Walking away was the hardest choice I had ever made, but it was also the moment I took my life back. For the first time, I moved forward on my terms, with no strings left behind, and no one else's desires guiding my path. The next morning, Kalen realized I was gone. His calls went unanswered. His texts were ignored. I could hear the panic in his voice when he finally found me at my sister's place, where I had quietly stayed the night. He tried to sound calm, but it was thin and forced. He began with guilt, reminding me of everything we had shared, every promise he had made, every plan he had drawn out for the future. He painted our life together as if it were fragile and dependent entirely on me staying. Then he shifted, softening his tone, trying the charm I knew too well, telling me how much he loved me, how he needed me, how life would be empty without us together. When that failed, he searched for someone to blame. "It's Jessa," he said, "she's the one who made everything confusing." But I didn't engage. I didn't respond with anger or tears. I stayed still, steady, calm. I refused to take on his mess, to be the one who absorbed the blame for decisions he had made, for boundaries he had ignored, for betrayals he had hidden. I could see his frustration building, the frantic gestures, the shaky words. He wasn't used to resistance from me. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just held my space, reminding myself silently that this was not my responsibility. For the first time, he realized that control had shifted. His attempts to manipulate, to pull me back, to rewrite the past, all failed. I had already stepped out of his world, and no pleading or blaming could draw me back. It was quiet, but underneath it, a storm was forming, for him, not for me. I had already chosen my peace, and he was left scrambling in the consequences of his own actions. Kalen thought he could move forward with Jessa without consequences. He imagined they could finally be together openly, that our past would be forgotten, and that he would finally get the life he wanted with her. But life had other plans. Her husband discovered the truth. The emotional affair, hidden for years in private messages and secret meetings, could no longer be contained. The moment he filed for divorce, the reality of their deception came crashing down. Friends and family who had trusted her were suddenly aware of the betrayal, and whispers of her long-standing dishonesty spread quickly. Kalen was stunned. He had assumed Jessa would stand by him, that she would choose him without hesitation, that the chaos would settle in their favor. Instead, she was forced to face her mistakes publicly. Her reputation, carefully maintained for years, unraveled in a matter of weeks. People questioned her character, her intentions, and the loyalty she had shown to everyone around her. Kalen's dreams of finally being with her dissolved into frustration and regret. The life he had imagined, one where he escaped consequences and found happiness, was gone. The affair that had seemed so secret and controlled had become his own undoing. Watching from the sidelines, I felt a quiet satisfaction. I wasn't the one causing this chaos, but I could see the natural outcome of the choices he had made. The stability and happiness he sought with her were replaced by public scrutiny, broken trust, and personal disappointment. They had both created their own downfall, and there was no one to blame but themselves. The world they had built on secrecy and selfish desires collapsed, leaving Kalen to face the reality of a life full of mistakes and empty promises. Kalen thought he could move forward with Jessa without consequences. He imagined they could finally be together openly, that our past would be forgotten, and that he would finally get the life he wanted with her. But life had other plans. Her husband discovered the truth. The emotional affair, hidden for years in private messages and secret meetings, could no longer be contained. The moment he filed for divorce, the reality of their deception came crashing down. Friends and family who had trusted her were suddenly aware of the betrayal, and whispers of her long-standing dishonesty spread quickly. Kalen was stunned. He had assumed Jessa would stand by him, that she would choose him without hesitation, that the chaos would settle in their favor. Instead, she was forced to face her mistakes publicly. Her reputation, carefully maintained for years, unraveled in a matter of weeks. People questioned her character, her intentions, and the loyalty she had shown to everyone around her. Kalen's dreams of finally being with her dissolved into frustration and regret. The life he had imagined, one where he escaped consequences and found happiness, was gone. The affair that had seemed so secret and controlled had become his own undoing. Watching from the sidelines, I felt a quiet satisfaction. I wasn't the one causing this chaos, but I could see the natural outcome of the choices he had made. The stability and happiness he sought with her were replaced by public scrutiny, broken trust, and personal disappointment. They had both created their own downfall, and there was no one to blame but themselves. The world they had built on secrecy and selfish desires collapsed, leaving Kalen to face the reality of a life full of mistakes and empty promises. Time passed, and I watched from a distance as the lives of Kalen and Jessa unraveled in ways I never had to touch. Jessa, confronted with the consequences of her choices, stepped back, unwilling to face the challenge of rebuilding what she had destroyed. Kalen, who had counted on her loyalty and the life he thought he could claim, found himself empty, isolated, and forced to confront the reality he had ignored for so long. Their plans, once filled with excitement and secrecy, collapsed under the weight of their own decisions. There were no apologies, no redemption arcs, only the natural outcome of actions driven by selfishness and desire. Each misstep they had taken against me returned to them, quietly but powerfully. As for me, I didn't need to confront them or orchestrate any revenge. I simply lived. I built my days around stability, fulfillment, and peace. I surrounded myself with people who mattered, pursued goals I had postponed, and allowed myself to enjoy a life that wasn't defined by betrayal. The quiet satisfaction came from knowing that I was no longer a pawn in anyone else's story. I wasn't the placeholder, the second choice, or the consolation prize. That position belonged to them. Every step I took, every calm morning and peaceful night, reinforced that truth. Their regret was theirs to bear, and my freedom and contentment were mine to cultivate. In the end, the strongest revenge wasn't confrontation or chaos. It was living fully, unapologetically, and beautifully without the two people who had tried to diminish me. They had given themselves the punishment, I simply walked forward into a life they could never take away.